Hi, I want to make a video on the subject of um, good and bad, and how just because it's not obviously bad doesn't mean it's not a bad that exists. Sort of like the tension I've mentioned before. Just because you don't perceive it, or you're too deluded or too ignorant to realize that it's a bad thing, you're being fooled by psychology and delusion and excitement, anticipation. You don't realize that these things, obviously, you realize the outcome, but you're so caught up in the game, you don't realize every individual circumstance. And the end culprit, the overall culprit, is the living game that's controlling us and allowing all these things to happen. It's the end game, it's the end goal, it's the root of the issue, it's the life game, it's the maze game, it's the trying to breathe, but you can't until then. And then when you do have the ability to breathe, you it's only so long before that tension wears away and that ability to appreciate it. You appreciate it, but you don't feel the appreciation anymore. You only feel it and as an understanding. And in many cases, I would argue that many people just understand much of their philosophy. They appreciate it, they feel it for brief moments, maybe, possibly, not all the time, but in some circumstances, but only briefly lasts. They only appreciate it for moments right back before they're not appreciating it anymore, physically or psychologically, but they can understand that it is, without psychology and the physicality of the issue, that it is something that you should appreciate. You appreciate it um, and intellectually. You intellectually understand something to be the truth. And I would argue many ways that's goes back to the idea of getting people to practice what they preach, and that's an issue that's has to be dealt with. And I think in many ways it takes a piece of that medicine, sometimes an almost constantly a chronic piece of the medicine where it's constantly coming back to bite you in the ass every once in a while and make sure things are kept in line at least. And even though it doesn't need that, it's something that's at least a consistent taste of reality every once in a while to let you know, yes, this is something I need to worry about, at least reinforced with my own ability to spread a message, make things matter, spread the message to other people that can make a bigger difference. And that's obviously the thing that you try to do, try to convince people. And it is the obligation of the person that knows more, the right thing, to spread the message more. And I'd say yes, the life game, just because it's not doesn't seem bad right now, or the tension, it's only so long before, yes, the intellectual understanding is there, and that could be good in certain circumstances. Um, Regardless of what it is about psychology or the way you perceive things, psychological suffering, physical suffering. Um, I think that it can. Let me see, where was I going with this? I think it can cause some confusion, like in my case right now, but it can. Let me just diverge a little bit just to make sure I can. Regardless, yes, just regardless of how much life can seem, um, I would, I would say that in many cases, yes, most people do live a life of intellectual understanding as opposed to realizing, almost living the existence as opposed to feeling or understand or physically feeling or psychologically suffering from a constant reminder of some kind of issue. And I'd say that's important to at least have an intellectual understanding, at the very least, more than anything. Intellectual understanding is mostly based off of an experience that you have, but that experience doesn't always last long. And I'd say most people that believe in an ideology like this do believe in or do have an intellectual understanding as opposed to a physical standing. They had a moment maybe in their life, and that's something they all of a sudden believed based on that one experience. It was bad enough to leave its mark, but the mark is being left constantly and over again. It's not a recurring chronic mark. It's not a constant reminder, but it is a constant reminder, but not manifesting itself as a constant reminder. It's just an intellectual understanding. Intellectual understanding is very vague and it's very thin, like thin air, because it's just an understanding as opposed to a physical thing existing. Even though feelings are kind of vague in their own way, it's just a feeling, it's something that's existing, it's an interaction. Well, then intellectual understanding is a little more thin because it's more of just a simple understanding based off of logic. And it's something that's an interaction that exists that leads to logic. It's just not existing in the same way that a feeling is based on a physical interaction that's happening or a psychological action that's happening. Intellectual can be there regardless of the thing. There's a disconnect in a way between a psychological understanding and a physical understanding, an intellectual understanding. It's happening in a physical thing. It's just the understanding is kind of vague, sort of like thin air of existence, where it's only negative, and that's what we're constantly fighting up. It's a constant. You're waving your hands in thin air every time you touch something. It almost feels like you're constantly fighting a battle of nothingness, but it exists and it's only negative. That's the thing you realize. It's not nothingness, it's just all negative, and it makes it seem like there's nothing to fight for because it's all negative. All these ideas are just sparks of electricity happening in a physical, chemical, and chemically infused piece of gray matter, of an organ. And that's what we're really based on. Water. Are we based on electricity? It goes down to the very core. Yes, we're based on a lot of those things. Um, Obviously, going down the order of operations based on those things, we're mostly made up of water, and it's mostly made up of electricity. On an atomic level, made up of particles based off of light, the speed of light moving around and causing these movements, causing these particles to move. It's only we're all made up of the light matter, a bunch of space, a bunch of nothing. That's leading to our existence and the formation of these things, creating molecules and causing all sorts of things to happen. Regardless of your understanding or not, it exists, and it doesn't need you to exist itself. You're just another piece of that puzzle, another living, breathing thing, and experiencing that existence and feeling that pain and the pleasure that comes with that um, living living thing. Anyway, living experience. But obviously, going back to the main point, yes, most people understand something intellectually based off of a small piece of medicine. And that's good. It doesn't take much medicine. The less medicine it takes, the better. But sometimes it does take, in many cases, extreme pieces of medicine to convince someone that something is wrong or that something isn't right, and to change their actions. And their actions do mean something going into the future because you're creating the future. It hasn't happened yet, but it's going to happen. And once it happens, that's when the actions cannot be changed. You still have that ability. Just because you feel like things are going to happen a certain way does not justify sitting around, because the things are going to happen a certain way, a different way, if you don't make the action happen. Um, it's only once it's happened, looking back retrospectively, can it be changed, not be changed. It can only be changed from here on out, moving forward. So regardless of that, that's something to consider as well. Don't always ignore your problems and say, oh, it's the way it was going to happen. It could have changed. It wasn't going to change. It has already happened. You can only apply that retrospectively, looking back, but it could have been different any moment, regardless. It's an illusion, sort of like the brain chemistry, the electricity. It's an illusion, a byproduct. When it's something that exists, regardless, it's a byproduct that exists in reality. It's based on interaction. The reality is mostly interaction based on these. It's just interaction between thin space and very, very space and small particles, basically interacting, and it's about those interactions as opposed to the physical things they make up, because the interaction is the base level of all these things that exist more than anything. I'd say, not it's me, but the truth. But regardless, just because you're caught up in the game doesn't mean it's not a bad game, doesn't mean it's a good game. It's just you're caught up in it. You live your life. You realize all the bad that happens. You're just deluded. It's a piece of psychology that's pulling you to believe in it, even though you understand it, or at least you're feeling the everyday existence. You're not understanding it, and you're not letting it take hold. Or you may be delusional, or you may be denying it. It doesn't mean it's not something that exists, and it does exist regardless of what you think or not, and regardless of what you're feeling or not. You do have these things. In many cases, I do believe it's denial. In other cases, I do believe um, it's people being ignorant, being stupid. It's stupid in many ways, but regardless of the stupidity, living life, loving life, the life lovers, those assholes, live and love life so much they can't goddamn take a moment's rest to realize what they're playing. They do, and they talk about their situational issues. Oh, it's just a situation, or it's just my life. No, it's life in general, allowing that whole circumstance to happen. Look at it at its core, at its root, and that pull it from out, pull the roots out, and realize that this thing can be changed, but it can only be changed at its root, and the root is eliminating life, eliminating the ability for it to be exist. And that's the only way you can change a life game, because it's based on a mechanism so fundamentally ingrained in reality that it can't be changed. And it's not because it's ingrained, it's because these interactions are reality, and there's no other way to live life. And it's something that exists, and we can only do so much about, and we can only ease the pain, but the pain is still there to make it so we can be gratified. There's no other way that psychology or anything can function other than being completely on lack of self-awareness, constantly being gratified. I would argue that it's physically impossible, but if it was, it would be destroying the meaning of the existence, um, creating no functional purpose, almost like a forget-me pill. And then all of a sudden you relive the moment over and over again, but you realize you're just living the same lie over and over again. And almost, I would say, out of principle, seems like a bad idea. But even though it's still the same game, it's based off of tension, and that's the fundamental aspect of existence, regardless of a forget-me-pill or being happy all the time. It's still based on the same mechanism. And I would argue that even though that doesn't exist, like the principle thing, I would say that doesn't matter, because the fundamental issue is it's a negative game regardless. It doesn't matter if you remember or forget. It's something that exists as a fundamental aspect of the character of existence, regardless of what you believe or not believe, or what you see or don't see. So it's there regardless of what you want to believe, and blah 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 blah. So yes, it's something that we all have to deal with on different varying levels, obviously. So regardless of what we believe, it exists. It exists. Sorry to inform you. Obviously, the only people watching this are people that are already at least slightly informed to a certain extent, even though you don't always seem like you're acting that way, or act like it, or seem like it. A bunch of goddamn cliches in your own ways, I suppose. But whatever it may mean. Yes, it's a game, not worth living, regardless of what you think, and regardless of your own self-delusion. It's something that exists objectively in the reality that we're living in. So yes, we are living in a world where the negative is the only thing possible. And like I said, doesn't any number of forget-me-pills can allow you to forget the fact that you were playing the same old game and almost in a way figuring out the forget-me-pill. Oh yes, or whatever happy pill you want to take, constantly being happy. Well, it does fundamentally change the character of our existence, because it would take away, but I would argue, like the principle, like I was mentioning before, that it's not fundamentally possible. But even if it were, like the principle thing, understanding, realizing, you don't always have to follow the principle, but isn't changing the facts of reality. And the facts of reality are, it still exists, and you're still doing the same thing. You're being happy. Happy for what? Where is it leading? More happy. Happy is the ultimate goal, right? Being happy, being exciting, being ecstatic, being euphoric. But it's all based, if you want to break it down, you can realize every single mechanism going on. And you realize that you're not changing anything, you're just reinforcing the same thing to happen over and over again, regardless of what may be the context. Forget-me pills, we're doing the same thing, being happy all the time. You would break the game, not reality, but you break the game because the game relies on those negative tensions to live. Um, the happy pill wouldn't change the fact that things still need to be solved. Otherwise, you're defeating the point of existing to begin with. Problems still need to be solved. Happy, what happy, even the bad circumstances, suffering still exists. Tension still exists regardless of what you're happy of. So regardless of that, it would be almost like the heaven argument. You're just going to be happy all the time, euphoric. Obviously, and then it's never explained how that's going to happen. What this heaven thing can really do beyond what playing in a harp forever with Jesus, or fucking your 72 virgins over and over again with never ending. I wouldn't say that's an ultimate solution to any kind of philosophical issue or problem by just relying on that kind of nonsense to make life more livable. But people seem to believe it to a certain extent. Some people, at least they claim to, all the people claim to, and very few people are honest when they say they believe something, but they don't. They want to believe it because it makes them feel better. Regardless, that a whole idea can't be explained because it's the same mechanism. It would break the game, but it wouldn't break the reality, and the reality is remaining the same regardless. It's a reality that exists, relying on the tensions that exist. And it doesn't matter how happy you are or how much of a forgiving pill you take. Those, I would argue, wouldn't exist, can't exist, and even if it's still there, no matter how happy you are, the tension is still there because that's the way reality works. It works that way regardless of how much you want to ignore it or be happy. You're going to be happy when you have a nail in your foot, are you? But the pain still exists, the tension still exists. I'm just happy. That's a state of mind. The state of mind doesn't change the fundamental character or state of reality. It just it changes your mind. Being high, we already have a happy thing, euphoric thing, alcohol. We already have those things. Obviously, they have their detriments on their own, but we're finding we think the solution is that, but without the detriments. It's not going to fix an issue because a nail in your foot is going to still be a nail in your foot. Wanting to eat is really wanting to eat. If you don't have those functions or those needs, what's the point of existing in the game to begin with? If you're not going to have those functions or those tensions or those things building up to allow a meaning in existence, because our meaning is the tension. The tension is thin air. Tension is real, but the meaning is thin air. Sort of like we're fighting an uphill battle to see a bunch of nothing. And that's the only thing we're leading to. It doesn't lead much to anywhere. So it's something that's kind of pointless. No, let me rephrase that. Completely pointless. It doesn't mean anything except the negative. Subtract everything but the negative, and that's what you have in life. So regardless, just because you're ignorant or whatever, you're addicted, like I've mentioned before, doesn't mean the game isn't a negative. Once you realize, you'll see, it's sort of like walking out of a dungeon, you'll realize just how deep, dark in the dungeon you were. And it was different. You'll realize, holy moly, at least intellectually speaking, having the smarts to realize that the game you're playing is silly. And not falling for the same mistakes again, because what's the point in the suffering and realizing the futile nature of reality when it's not going to do any good because you know the truth. It's best just to intellectually understand and move on with that and spread that message because the suffering is kind of pointless at that point. It leads nowhere. You're suffering for no reason but to know the truth, and the truth is painful in many ways, but it's better to know the truth and reinforce it so the same mistakes can't be happening again. The ends justify the means in that circumstance. So yes, that's all I need to say on that subject. So just because it doesn't seem that way, you're living a life, doesn't mean it's not going to be not bad. You realize that since it's the only thing and it's all bad and you don't realize it's the only thing there is, doesn't mean it's still not bad. It's still bad. It's still bad and you're still doing the same thing and you've gone through your fair share. And you'll realize, yes, this is a bad game. I'm living it. Just because you're living it doesn't mean it's not a broken game. It's still a broken game. Regardless of how living your life you are, guess what? You wouldn't have to live the life if you weren't already existing. No one had you. No one made this mistake of living life wonderfully. That problem wouldn't exist just because it already exists. Doesn't mean it had to exist. But it does exist, so you have to make the most of it, and you have to make up for the mistakes that people in the past, people's past, of history's past, made the mistakes of, and trying to recognize the truth and change those mistakes, because the obligation is now on you as well, because you're a living thing. It was always in the past, and now is into the future, because you were going to exist anyway once things happen. But you're in the process of that because you're the tool moving the mechanism. But yeah, just regardless, just because that's the case doesn't mean that you can't change anything. Just because you view it that way doesn't mean it's not bad. It's still bad. You must be mad if you don't think it's bad. Batshit insane, crazy fuckers. But regardless, that's the game we're playing. Regardless of how much it seems so, it's the game we're playing. Just because it's already happened doesn't mean it's right. Just because it's still existing doesn't mean it's right. It just means it happened, and now things are going to happen, right or wrong, either way. Just because we can't put a label to right or wrong, we can understand, generally speaking, right or wrong, and something's existing, and right or wrong is reality, and subjectivity and objectivity are not based off of right and wrong. They're based off of something existing, and we can understand based off of experience and understanding reality what is right and wrong, generally speaking, regardless of your subjective opinion or not. But it's based off of existence, something existing, not right or wrong in your opinion. Reality is based off of existing. It's there, not good or bad, or your opinion, what's good or bad, or what's right or wrong, or up and down and left or right. It doesn't matter if your right's left and left's right, and up, down, left, or up, down, up. It doesn't matter. It's still the same thing. It still exists. There's an up, there's a down. It doesn't matter what you do. If you're sitting upside down, it doesn't mean there's not an up and a down. It still exists. from my subjective opinion, that's up and that's not. It doesn't matter. It still exists, and the up and down is a contrivance because it still exists. Regardless, that's all I need to say on that subject. It's a pointless subject to go on about, but it exists regardless. The relationship exists, and if you want to be subjective with an up and down, down, up, down, up, right, right, whatever it may be, yes, you can look at it objectively, take a step outside yourself, and realize, oh, it doesn't matter what I'm saying, even though it is part of reality. Look outside of myself and realize that all these things that I'm saying are all part of the same thing, regardless of what up, this, that, and the other thing. It's still existing. And these relative positions don't mean anything other than a description of what's already existing in this reality, just a different way, but it's existing already. So regardless, I think that's all I need to say on this subject. Sorry for another long video, but it happens from time to time. So I think that's all I need to say. And if there's anything else I need to mention, there's always another video to make. Anyway, that needs to stop eventually. Till next time, bye.